show today, we are talking about communications network infrastructure, which is really the backbone to wireless and broadband access. And on the show, we have Dan Levac and Brendan O'Boyle. So a little bit of background on them. So Dan, been in the industry for over 40 years. Started as a cable splicer for Bell Canada, Fiber Broadband Association committee member, SCTE Buckeye Chapter current secretary and committee member, PCCA Hall of Fame inductee. That's pretty impressive. So tell us a little bit about your induction speech.
And also why you laughed when he said 40 years in the industry.
Well, 40 years,
I want to know all
it's the
about
way
that.
he said it. It's like 40 years.
Jeez.
It's actually 44. I'm in my 44th year.
Wow.
But let's talk about a little bit about the induction speech, because that basically culminates for everything that I've been doing.
Set the stage first. What is the PCCA?
So that's the Power and Communication Contractors Association, right? So the PCCA membership, the contractors are people that deploy about 85% of the fiber that goes into the deployment strategy across the United States. So it's a very important and extremely valuable organization for people to understand and get involved with. I've been a member of the PCCA for over 20 years. And during that time, I jumped right in head first. I thought it was imperative that it has to be something that's bigger than oneself. So I took the approach that I think is very important for us to give back to the industries we serve. And part of my speech said, back during COVID, for instance, they used the term, meaning the government used the term, what was the...
It was like indispensable or
essential.
Essential,
right?
that's what it was,
Essential.
yeah.
But unfortunately, that word was used as a separator. Like you're either essential to be working or you're not essential to be working. And I made a comment at the induction ceremony that everybody in the audience directly impacted every man, woman, and child in the United States. Now that's essential, right? Mm-hmm. But I think we have to take that on as a challenge to make sure that we understand that what we do is bigger than oneself. It's about growth of an individual, true, but it's also about growth of a country, about growth of a company, about growth of an industry. And I think we have to give back to it. And that's why I jump into as many memberships as I can to actively participate. And I've joined a couple new committees with the SCTE. I'm on the Re-Energized Task Force. I'm on the WG5, WG6 work groups. I want to be able to give back to the country or to the companies that we serve. And the thing is that I never go in this with an attitude of selling. It's about service. And I think if we keep that in mind, that we'll do well in the industries we serve.
Mm-hmm. Also been named on 6 patents for OSP products. We did not fact check that, but I feel like we should.
Feel free, because I got 6 more in the hopper and a couple more that Brendan and I are working on a side note. We can't talk about that. We'd have to kill you, Josh, and you're much too young. But anyways, the patents come from truly listening to customers, right? Understanding how they develop and what they do to deploy. Our job is to try to make it easier, better, slicker, and a little bit less expensive. And so that's the goals we do. We want to provide that. And again, it comes back to understanding it as a service. And PLP supports us in that because it's a company, since its inception, has been predicated on service and ideas, right? Innovation. I mean, not many companies have an innovation team. We do, and they truly listen to customers. And that's an imperative. We have to listen to our customers to be successful.
Right. Great. And Brendan, so been in the broadband industry for almost 20 years. Started out as a manufacturer's rep. We were talking a little bit about that, and you were explaining, a lot of people don't understand what that is. So
yeah, people confuse it with the distributor. That it's kind of like, who's this sales guy? Why do I have to abide this guy? When's he going to leave? The real value of a rep and what people maybe don't understand about that is it is an extension of a manufacturer. They've got companies big and small, but ultimately these are the people that are here to help. And when it comes to Dan's point of view about, needing to be a better listener and wanting to make sure that we're solving people's problems and making things easier for them, I didn't start in the service side. I've always been in the sales/manufacturing side of the business. And, this is just where I come from. This is my point of view. Dan's a guy that grew up in the industry. But from my point of view, I've always had to listen to find out what everyone wants. You can choose to offer solutions that aren't going to help them because it's a personal benefit to you. But the key to all of it, I think at this point, is understanding that it's supposed to be a selfless act, because everyone does need help. They'll tell you what they need. You just have to listen. So yeah, the rep thing was an interesting deal. And then, PLP was one of those companies that I was represented as an independent contractor, and then liked it so much that I came on. So yeah, I drank the blue Kool-Aid, and here we are.
I understand that PLP is the place to be.
Really? Did you just come up with that?
That's what I've heard.
Really?
Yeah.
Seemed original on the spot.
It was. It was original on the spot when I said it originally.
I'm enamored by you.
Also, Brendan is the associate board member of North Central Texas SCTE chapter.
Yep.
Chair of the Fiber Broadband Association's Deployment Specialist Committee. Very involved in the Fiber Broadband Association, including being a project manager for several important industry white papers, some of which we're going to get into, and involved in FBA's Optic path for training and development. Yep. And has a bachelor's degree in media studies from Northern Illinois University.
That's right. Don't be scared of the MAC conference.
I was in the MAC.
Were you?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
Miami, Ohio.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I knew
husky.
that.
You weren't a husky.
I wasn't.
You were not a husky.
No.
This
I was
man-
born
this-
husky.
this
I
man is
live
a
husky.
This man is a husky. That's all I'd like to say about that.
Yeah, that's right. Well, when you come from the great legacy of barbed wire and Cindy Crawford, being from DeKalb isn't such a bad thing. So, yeah, well, cool. Well, Mac Conference Unite.
Mac proud.
That's right. Mac proud.
Okay, so let's get into it. So yeah, we're talking about communications network infrastructure, and a big part of that is broadband and access to broadband, which is driven by fiber optics and fiber optic network growth, which is Dan, as you know, first deployed in the 70s and 80s, but seems to be having a moment right now where there's a lot of building, a lot of investment. Why is that?
It's not the first time it's happened, right? So in the United States in the 30s, there was a push to electrify the country. So they wanted to put outlets in every single home in the United States. Like fiber, when they did that, it was not a short-term project. It was generational, and it took time for all of those linemen, for all of the electrical workers, for everybody that worked on that process. It was generational. Secondly, we did it again, right? The United States was successful at doing it a second time, and that was for telephone. They did the plain old telephone service. Again, linemen, working underground, overhead, direct buried. They did it all. And again, generational. And now we have it with fiber. Cable TV tried to do it. They didn't quite get out as far as they wanted to do. But now that because the government with the BEAD program is offering incentives and offering some money to go out there and do this, broadband has become more broad. Right? Now we're able to push out further, but again, it's going to be generational. It's going to take a long time for us to get it out there, but it's doable.
And the moment I think that it's having is probably based on the time, the era that we're in, and the technology that's there. When they were electrifying America, everyone knew that they were operating in candlelight. It was obvious that they all wanted it, but if you weren't going to a town hall physically to talk about the needs of the community, you probably weren't understanding what the world needed. Yeah, there was newspapers and all that, but what differentiates this is not only is fiber the current medium, it's the medium that empowers all of us to be connected. So I think why it's having a moment is we've reached the threshold or maybe the crux of where the internet meets political understanding of what every citizen needs. And obviously that was enabled by COVID. The minute the world locked down, this was an inevitability that, okay, this is essential. We know we need this. And so obviously that happened it started a few years ago, but this is the way policy works in this country. You cannot get stuff moved quickly or done quickly. Unless you're going to lock the world down. That was pretty fast. But in regards to the policies that are born out of that, there's, several policies that we're seeing that are currently being enacted that are a result of COVID. This fiber having a moment and it's a thing and everyone's got to have it. That's why we're doing it right now. And then also there are aspects of digital inequality or inequity where, and I think that this is what fiber's done since its beginnings. And this is what the Fiber Broadband Association really focuses on is, there are communities out there today. It's hard to believe if you live in any kind of city or a place that already has broadband access. There's still places that don't have any stop signs, let alone a one-stop sign town. They have no broadband capability. They're lucky if they'll have a POTS line. Maybe they've somehow reworked that into a 2.5 megabits per second download connection, barely any upload. It's virtually unusable.
Let's talk about that a little bit more too, though, because we have to differentiate. Broadband is not broadband, right?
True.
We're talking about high speed. We're talking about something that has a value, because you can differentiate the value of broadband predicated on its speed, upload and download, right? Symmetrical is definitely the way to go. It's going to give us the longest term product that will have value attached to it for the longest period of time. If you look at some markets, they've had to rebuild about every 7 years because of technology. But the transport of fiber itself gives you future proof. It future proofs your deployment strategy to the point that now it's end equipment that's going to change it or adjust it upwards, right? So I think we have to understand the differentiation between simple broadband and valuable broadband.
And the policy, coming back to that, that's why that's so important, is that if you look at the FCC's minimum policy on broadband service, we started off with 10 megabits per second download, 1 megabits per second upload. You couldn't operate a household on that today. If you have a smart refrigerator or your kids have iPhones, video game consoles and stuff like that. But our washers and dryers are smart now. I mean, smart garages. I water my lawn from 3 states away. I mean, it's a different world. So you could not live under that threshold. So they've increased it. They increased it from that to 25.3, 25
Still can't
down,
do it.
3 up. Yeah, even by today's standards, just not possible.
No, because if you have more than 3 devices and you're actively using those devices, 25.3 will allow you to do 2. They won't let you stream. They won't let you game. They won't let you do all of these different things simultaneously. That's why symmetrical speeds up to 100 will provide you the ability to do all of that. But we don't know where the need goes from here. Autonomous vehicles.
Right. That was my next point, is that you talked a lot about consumer, but there's also a business side of this, right?
Absolutely. Again,
artificial intelligence.
Has to be value.
Right.
There has to be value for it to push it out. We wouldn't be in this position today if there was not value attached to strong, high-speed broadband, right? Broadband is becoming more broad.
Right.
There's more uses for it. And in order to achieve the ability to provide for it, we have to have the best. The best transport system has to be in place.
And communications is one of those industries that really drives other industries.
Absolutely. It's now, broadband has become an essential utility.
Right.
Right? And I use the term essential, and I hate the term when it's utilized as a negative. But in this case, I think it's extremely positive because everybody deserves to have it, because there's a value attached to it to the point where it can better anybody's life. So that's a key point in this as well.
Yeah, and you were talking about it moving kind of the business side of things. It's really interesting when you're embedded in the industry that we get the ability to be, and probably most people that listen to this will be. It's fun to hear about applications that aren't here, but they're coming. And one of those is like driverless cars. And, I was at a seminar at one of the conference deals where there was a guy talking about the amount of data transmission required if you wanted to do a driverless car service. And he was talking about it was one of the retirement communities in Florida, one of these like giant citywide retirement communities. And he had a service where they had a LiDAR unit that was on top of this car that was taking in all this data. So if someone was walking across the street, the LiDAR would track that, and then it would slow down and come to a stop and all this stuff. Well, transmitting all of that data from that point to the data center locally and then to wherever it was backhauling to across the country, which is their main data center, you need fiber to do all of that. And the fact of the matter is there is long-haul fiber by way of Zayo and Lumen and these companies that are doing this stuff, but it's not enough. There's not enough bandwidth in place to scale this at a point where the country can promote these driverless car things. So it's really funny when people talk about Teslas and their driverless, and driverless cars are coming. It's like, well, not if fiber's not here. It's just not possible.
Well, and you mentioned it. You said you need fiber, but you need a lot
Oh, yeah,
of fiber
a lot.
too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's the funny thing you mentioned about me being around in the 70s and 80s when all this stuff started. When we started, I'd have a 4-fiber cable in. We'd have a 12-fiber cable. Oh, we'll never need any more. And then, of course, everything is cyclical, right? In the communications industry, it's about every 7 years things start to change and develop and redevelop, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, I just put in a 144. Now what are we talking about?
Oh, 1728, 3456, 6912.
6912.
Right, sure.
Really? Oh my God. But wait, there's more, right? There's more need. Every time you turn around, we're finding more purpose, more need, and more insight for people. They're developing more things. They're innovating more things. We ain't done yet.
And you talk about the count of fiber, but also just the length of fiber, covering everywhere. I mean, people talk about wireless. I mean, there's a whole network of wires that power that wireless.
That's correct.
There is?
Well,
Shocking,
more
right?
fiber.
I thought it wasn't plugged into anything.
Fiber.
It was just the cell phone works, and then there's the tower. I got that. And then there's the cell phone.
Right. Yeah, I looked up something like the top 3 U.S. carriers have like 3 million route miles of fiber, which is just to put it in perspective. That's like to the moon and back like 6 times.
But don't call it wires. It's fiber.
Well, to the point though. Well, no, but in all joking aside, you can find Crown Castle's kind of public statements, their annual reports online, and they do a really good job illustrating the use of fiber optic cable in their wireless networks. So a lot of people, this is again an understanding of where the infrastructure is to understand what we can actually do versus what we say. And one of these big things is 5G. You can read in Crown Castle's, public statements that you need cable to power all of these wireless radios. It's not possible to do it without it. And they're spaced very close, 500 feet, 700 feet apart, and you can find this if you go to downtown Atlanta. You can see a 5G network, plain as day, mounted to all of the light poles and traffic poles that are out there.
All the small cells.
All the small cells that are out there. But
kind of
that's
explain
all
what all
fiber.
of that is and why that's different from 4G, because 4G didn't have that. 5G needs that.
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing is that G is not gig. I think when you understand that, right? Generation, right? So you had first generation cell phones, which was basically phone calls, right? And then 2G, 3G, 4G went from phone call and text to
LTE.
Well, fair. I'm trying to keep it broad, but you're right. We could get in the weeds, but what it ultimately comes down to is with every G comes an evolution in what it does. So it's phone call and text, phone call and internet and email and video, and then high-speed video.
They're already
HD video.
They've already talked about 6G. They're already talking about deploying 6G.
Well,
and then where does it go from there?
Well, that's it. And,
Gee whiz.
Well, but that's the thing is that on 5G, what it is and what differentiates it from 4G is that 5G is trying to emulate a fiber to the home connection, which is the fastest, most reliable speed you can get, but mobile.
Right.
So it wants you to have sub 4 millisecond or something latency. You're supposed to be able to have over a gigabit download, and also I believe it's symmetrical.
Symmetrical.
Right? So you're trying to get this fiber-like performance wirelessly, and the thing is that it's not that wireless connections are bad; they're actually really good. If you look up it's funny, understanding fiber cables and wireless and what's better and worse. The truth is that they're both good. You can see that there was a race at the New York Stock Exchange to download data faster.
Whoever could get it there quicker
Whoever could get it there faster
right?
wins. And so everyone was working on how do I get my fiber cable from that to my facility, but wait, I need to make it as straight as possible because if there's any little curves, that'll be latency.
There'll be latency built in. And that's the thing about traders. They want to have it as quick and the least amount of latency
Well, these
possible.
companies that want to make these microtransactions, they got to have this. And then, but the guy that ultimately won was the wireless guy because he had that direct point of contact. Whenever you're installing that cable underground, the curvature of the earth causes enough where these guys want the fastest thing
milliseconds
possible.
Different.
Yeah, exactly. So bringing that back to 5G, the thing is that you can have fast speeds wirelessly. It's not impossible, but you do have to bring fiber as close as you can to that subscriber to be able to do that. And there's also, being able these radio units have to be able to juggle multiple signals in and multiple out. It's called MIMO, and so
they have to be closer to the user, right?
100%. Yeah. So you'll still have macro towers that will feed these small cells that when someone's talking on the phone or browsing on the internet, now their wireless signal will beam to that unit that's closest to them within 700 meters or whatever. And then that will backhaul to wherever it's going to go. And since the fiber is all the way to that point that's within 700 meters of that person, it can do that data interchange, upload, download, whatever it does over the fiber to give them the service they need on their phone, like it's a fiber connection. But again, you can't have that broadly unless you have fiber everywhere.
Everywhere.
So you can go to, I mean, I live in Fort Worth, Texas. It's a major city, and there are people, you can get the word 5G on your phone. And I know a lot of people claim to be offering the best 5G, but when we talk as an industry as 5G and we envision driverless cars as a result, it's an all or nothing proposition, right?
Yep.
Or if it's not, just acknowledge it and say it's going to be these 30 cities and that's it. But that's not what we talk about. And to Dan's point, now we're on to 6G, and it's like, now hold on a minute.
I'm just, hey, don't
we're
shoot
like
the messenger.
We're an eighth of the way to 5G.
We haven't even realized the abilities and capacities of 5G at this point. Mm-hmm. Some of us don't know really what it means and what it entails and how far you can go with it. But to Brendan's point, if you're going to have autonomous vehicles, if you're going to have driverless cars, it can't be in one spot.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to be everywhere.
So what we're talking about is a massive amount of infrastructure and infrastructure build-outs.
That's why I say it's generational.
Right. And at this point, you're having governments step in because understanding that this is necessary. In the U.S., we have the BEAD program and BEAD funding. They have it everywhere else around the world as well, in Europe and so on. So explain what is BEAD and why is that necessary?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I would tell you the acronym, but I always screw it up. But it's basically Broadband Economic Advancement
Or
and
equity.
Yeah, exactly that. And
equity
so,
and access or something.
Right. Basically what it is BEAD is a subset of the overall Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the ILJA Infrastructure Act that Joe Biden passed. I guess it was last year already, right? Mm-hmm. And basically times flies. What it really comes down to is it is a funding vehicle for every state and 6 U.S. territories to get an amount of money based on the lack of connection, unserved or underserved. Underserved meaning it's under the minimum FCC threshold.
Which is currently 25.3.
Correct.
But they did bump that up to 120.
Yes, but they've also gone ahead to say they've spoken out publicly about their preference for fiber, which is symmetrical. So we'll kind of get into it a little bit, and then you've got underserved, and then you have unserved entirely. And there are unserved entirely people, if you can believe it, they're out there, and it's a tragedy. But so they'd actually, as of the recording of this podcast this week, they just released the funding for the states.
$42 billion.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like I live in Texas, they're getting $3.3 billion of money. It's hard to believe because that state is like a sinkhole for money when it comes to broadband. I mean, it is the busiest state. It shall be the busiest state. And I would guess that even after BEAD, the next major funding vehicle, because there will be another one, it
Has to be.
Texas is still going to be the biggest. Yep. So it's just that big. But if you take a look at the Midwest, we talked about Northern Illinois University. So I'm a Midwest guy. If you look from North Dakota down to Texas, that's a $12 billion swath of land, right? Yeah. And it kind of turns out that 4 or 5 state patches, depending on what you look at, except for when you get to the Northeast, it's a little bit less because of all the work that's been done by major carriers like Consolidated and Frontier and all this, that are all written about in Fierce Telecom and whatnot. When it comes down to it, each territory is, smaller patches. You can get like these $4 billion patches of territory, in the South, you've got Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana, those states combined, it's an average kind of territory is about $4 billion. So anyway, they are doing that because certain states have not been able to get the broadband access they require. Because the business model is it's so expensive.
Too few users to
too few users, and construction costs are extremely high. And that's the same thing, right? But it's kind of looking at it a little bit in the way of you can have a need for emergency services that no one would argue. You can have a need for access to telemedicine and things that we would view as essential services. Even today, this isn't 5G stuff. Like I can telemed a doctor from where I'm at, and some people can't. And what it comes down to is based on the cost per pass or how profitable that passing is, carriers will decide whether they want to allocate their resources towards deploying in, Chukaboo,
Right. It's a business
Wyoming, or it's a business decision at the end of the day. So this allows everybody to have some offsetting funds. There are strings attached. There are things that everyone needs to understand before they dive in headfirst into it that they need to, kind of come through on. But as long as everyone's into it, that takes the money and they understand the obligations that they're making and the labor that's required and the materials that they'll require through all that, and they can stay on schedule and they get their connections signed up, then we're going to spend $42.5 billion or whatever.
It's still not
5
enough.
years.
It's still not enough. And I think it's too quick. The 5 years is a pipe dream predicated on the fact that we don't have enough manpower to deploy it, right?
Yeah.
That's a big problem in the industry. That's why almost every organization we're a part of has a training program to get more people on the feet on the street to work in the industry. It's a great industry. It's a great career. And it's a great opportunity for people coming out of high school, right? Not necessarily needing a college degree to make an impact in the industry. And you can make a very good living at it. It's a phenomenal industry, great people. But something that people aren't talking about very much is what happens after BEAD. What happens after we...
Well, I was going to bring that up because both of you went to Washington and you met with members of Congress. Dan, I don't know how they let you in there.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is.
Yeah,
He shaves
somehow
his
you
cheeks.
passed the background check. I don't know.
I've passed it many times.
He cleans up nice, like real
That's
nice.
amazing.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
It's my chucks. They like my chucks.
That is true.
Yeah.
But obviously, you were there talking to members of Congress about these issues and initiatives. And so what were the topics of conversation there? What was most important?
It goes to immigration. It goes to, deployment of the fiber, and we talk about the speeds.
So immigration, in what way does that relate to?
Well, it relates
deployment?
to it because we're so short of people in the industry that we talk about immigration and to fix the problems that we have, right? It's not necessarily about fixing or letting illegal immigration happen. It's about fixing the legal immigration part so we don't have to worry about illegal immigration. As you know, I'm a born-again Canadian, and now I'm an American. I went through the process, and it took me 9 years to come here legally. It's a very difficult, expensive process to do it. So it's no wonder a lot of people can't do it, and they choose to do it the wrong way. My only comment to them is that whenever you reward bad behavior, you get more bad behavior, right? So fix the legal immigration issues that we have in this country today, and illegal immigration will be taken care of. That's pretty simple. You can't reward bad behavior. We talk about that. We talk about the infrastructure itself. We talk about the speeds. We talk about the best possible strategy to utilize, i.e. fiber, and understanding that it's not just about the fiber. It's about everything that goes with the fiber, whether it's the closures, whether it's the hardware. Are we deploying it aerial? Is it underground? Are we using handholds? Are we using manholes? What are we doing and how are we deploying it? And you got to strategize, right?
And by the way, is it American made?
Exactly,
Right?
right?
So that's a big deal. The Yeah, so build American, buy American provisions are a big deal,
Yep.
right? And we're a U.S. company. There's several U.S. companies that are in broadband, but we're seeing this big flood of international manufacturers, if you will, bringing solutions stateside that do not pass Telcordia standards that we have to pass with our products if you want to sell them to any major, ILEC or tier one carrier like an AT&T, Frontier, et cetera, they have to pass this Telcordia, GR standard usually for what we're doing. And there's standards for fiber optic cable, GR20, and then there's GR771 core, which is for closures. And a lot of these new solutions coming in are untested, basically unreliable from the standpoint of they haven't been here, and a lot of the major brands that people that would listen to this are familiar with, including Corning, CommScope, PLP, OFS Prismian, et cetera, Old Castle. I mean, these names that you're familiar with, these are brands that people should look at and feel more comfortable with, right? But when you have closures that are being brought in from India and Israel and Korea and all this stuff to be able to solve these problems, it's a big issue, not just economically for the U.S. because it's a money grab that it's a lot of people still beat up on Toyota for sending money outside of the country. And it's like, okay, well, they have all these manufacturing facilities here and they do pay the local taxes and all that stuff. But some of these companies are just onshoring products. So they're not even really paying local taxes per se. There's going to be a sales tax on the items, but their infrastructure is overseas. This is a big concern. So coming back to talking to politicians about this is a big issue because, they want to support U.S. manufacturers. They want to support their global kind of alliances through, free trade zone areas and previous commitments like NAFTA and all of this, where you can have areas that aren't necessarily U.S. that still pass a standard because there's a history related to it. But I think after we lived through what we lived through in 22 with the supply chain issues and everything like that, there's obviously a lot of inroads into our country and these deployers, to come back to the BEAD thing, who are going to be on the timelines that they're going to be on, and they're required to meet them. And there's an expectation that the NTIA would give extensions to projects that have full intention to deploy, but don't have the products or manpower to do it, because along with materials being a problem, labor is a massive issue. If they can't make it, they'll probably extend, but try to explain that to a guy who does have a timeline that doesn't necessarily have the word in writing from the NTIA that they are going to extend. Mm-hmm. What decisions are you going to make? If you're a contractor that's out in the field somewhere and you're waiting for a locate, which is what you got to do whenever you're going to dig, you got to call 811. We don't have enough labor to go out and locate that stuff. So what do? You decide to either put your shovel in the ground, damage the water pipes and gas pipes and all this stuff that's underground, maybe cause explosions and all that.
Heaven forbid someone dies.
Or you wait. Yeah, so that's possible. Or you wait. And then if you wait, now you're on the clock. So this is why it gets up to Capitol Hill in regards to these types of topics of immigration and supply chain and all that, because it's on a macro level. It's kind of hard to understand how it will exactly impact a project, but it all impacts projects in a very real way.
And it's funny you mentioned the contractors too. I've been talking to a lot of contractors because that's part of what I do, and almost every one of them, they have their job book full for the next 3 to 5 years. That's not even including BEAD. Mm-hmm. Now what? Right? Who deploys the remainder? These guys are full for the next 3 to 5. Now you include
yellow equipment is on back. You can't even get yellow equipment
right.
either, right?
So that's what I was going to ask. What is the biggest hurdle to deployments? I mean,
people and equipment, and probably talk to the CGA, Common Ground Alliance. They're going to talk about call 811. They're going to talk about understanding. Those guys have aggressive things to go, right. The 50 and 5, and they want to get better at what they do. But the only way to do that, it takes more manpower, more time, and more equipment.
So, what about supply chain? Is there ready access to products and things that are needed when they're needed?
If they need it today, we're getting there today now. I mean, we're coming back. But once BEAD's implemented, we're going to go right back to where we were 18 months ago. So, I mean, you helped me build a T-shirt that said, if you're not in the queue, it's on you. Well, that's going to be the case again. But when we got out of the worst part of it, we had people that were fear buying, right? They were panic buying that they wouldn't have enough. So now we got a lot of inventory out there. So that's cool for today. But once BEAD hits again, we're going to find ourselves right back in the same position we were 18 months ago, or even worse. Even worse.
Yeah, and that is a huge issue. It was a huge issue. I think the market still continued to deploy. Mm-hmm. And if there wasn't the kind of the turn down, if you will, in panic buying or whatever, and the market didn't cool because of the interest rates and all the other factors that really drove that, if it just kept going, we would have kept deploying. So I think that's not the biggest issue. It's a big issue, especially when you're a guy that's waiting for a thing and you don't have it. It's a major problem. So you have to plan, you have to communicate. Don't compromise, I think was your thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like don't buy second best. Why would you compromise your network? You're going to own it. But guys sometimes and gals sometimes have to make decisions like that. But I do think that this labor thing is probably the biggest issue. Locates are this hidden issue that people don't really understand that this is part of it.
Permitting.
If you've ever, permitting is a big deal as well. It's kind of the same issue, only government bodies can decide to do it faster and they can approve and they don't.
Like quickness of permitting, or
yes, the speed in which the permits are granted. And even the call before you dig, the 811, I mean, they've limited the amount of permits that they will give.
Right.
They've limited the like for 1,800 feet, or
Right.
they're limiting it so as to be able to do it for more than just one person.
Right.
But again, it's limiting the deployment strategies that a lot of these contractors have.
I think that you so you touched on this in one of your white papers, right, on micro trenching and nano trenching, and I think that's how things can be deployed faster.
That is the claim, and I think after going through that process, and I'm not the subject matter expert, and I wouldn't pretend to be, but after going through a process where I'm looking at this with contractors, equipment manufacturers, and the operators that are doing it at a high level, including Google Fiber, including Ting, including Crown Castle. When you're talking to guys like that, and you're talking to Dycom, one of these major contracting firms, and you're talking to Vermeer and these guys that are building the equipment, I will say that they've made a really compelling argument that if you do microtrench, you will be able to install faster, but there are just circumstances where it's not going to make sense. I think one thing's for sure, we're not microtrenching everywhere we could be to utilize that speed. So I think that will be something that we'll grow into as a country deploying stuff. We see more and more operators throwing in on it. Some of the major guys that said we'll never do that are now doing it without getting into specifics. But we can see that there's a phasing in of this. And so, but there are places where it just doesn't make sense.
Explain what
on the micro trenching,
what that is, what micro trenching, and why it's different.
Very shallow, right? And you don't have to worry about hitting any of the utilities that are in the area. The problem that I see with it is down the road when something next has to happen. Unless it's marked and documented to the nth degree, they're going to cut that up in a heartbeat when they go to do and service maybe a water line or a gas line.
Yeah, that is an issue that is a concern. There are different operators deploying it at different depths, right? So of those operators I mentioned that were involved, not any of them has the same standard. They all have a different standard at the depth, and I think you'll get different outcomes as a result of that.
Yep.
What Dan's talking about is, municipal projects will happen. I would argue that they're going to probably happen anyway and probably cause issues potentially. Yes, microtrenching puts you in the roadway. That's particular for that deployment style. So if the road's going to move, then that's a problem. So I guess what I think I know, and I don't know anything, really, I don't have to run the operation, but talking to really smart guys that do, is that if you're operating within corridors that do get updated, moved, enhanced, there's a lot of growth expected. You can expect that particular run is going to get chewed up and you're going to have to replace it. But if you put it into older communities that aren't going to be updated a lot, or the growth is there, like if it's a new subdivision, the houses are all built, you're not going to move the roads, you're not going to widen them. The easement's the easement, it is what it is. That's probably a good place to do it. In that last mile, last connection's not the most ideal as I understand it. There's another way to install called missile boring. I hear that's probably better. It's like air-driven deployment of fiber, basically, that allows you to install much faster and more efficiently.
Directional boring is probably the way to go in those smaller jobs like that.
Which is another way, so it's this toolkit, right?
Right.
And so microtrenching, it's got a place. It caught a really bad rap because there was some really public lawsuits involving Google Fiber that I think they're the first to say, hey, look, we're growing, we've learned lessons. I think every deployer is saying, look, we're growing, we've learned lessons, but it is a mature deployment style. I think that you can find a lot of good information out there, and cities should consider it in order to move things forward, because part of this permitting process, it comes down to even like environmental permitting. Like every time that you want to deploy somewhere, you have to do an environmental analysis, whether there's already 3 utilities there already or not.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And so that can be a year-long process, no joke, where you wait for that approval of that. Well, if we have to wait for permitting on areas that have already been churned 3 times previously, we're obviously not going to deploy this network as fast as possible. So that's where part of where the permit problems really come into play is we're not permitting smartly, right? So that's that aspect of it. And microtrenching can help with that because the roadway's there. It's not that you don't have to call before you dig and recognize the utilities that are there.
But it's like everything else we do. It's like it's not one size fits all, right? Everything, even broadband, there's going to be people that don't need 100 symmetrical systems. They're fine with 25.3. But once you hit that mark, you can scale down, right? And you can adjust. Same thing with the deployment strategies. It's not one size fits all. There's geographic issues, there's topography, there's so many different reasons why you would deploy differently. And you've got to let the experts do their job and show you what the best strategy is for that particular, because it's not all aerial and it's not all underground. It's going to be a combination of both. So you've got to have the performance of the hardware, you've got to have the performance of the product that meets the need for each one of those. But I want to go back a minute and talk about the politicians one last time. There's one other topic that we're not talking about that we need to be discussing, and that's the USF, right? The Universal Service Fund. It's missed. It's not named properly anymore. It's not functioning properly anymore, and it's not funded properly anymore, because it's the big carriers that had to pay for the USF in order to subsidize for maintenance purposes. So as we spend $42 billion going into this industry, 20 years down the road, there's going to be a lot of maintenance that has to be done on this. So in order to do that, my thought process was that the Universal Service Fund has to be renamed to the Universal Broadband Fund, and anybody that provides broadband, I don't care if it's wireless, I don't care if it's satellite, I don't care if it's terrestrial, it has to be able to pay for that fund. That way, that's going to maintain this for a long time to come, because they're thinking one and done, and it's the wrong play.
So what's the fund? What was the fund used for, and what do you want it to be used for?
The Universal Service Fund was simply made to make whole. It was to subsidize the smaller companies in the rurals to offset the cost of the deployment in order to meet ROI on a sub, right? That day is gone, because only the tier one carriers were basically paying for that, right? So on your telephone bill, you had USF tax, basically, what it was. But now I think it has to be renamed. It has to be refunded properly so that it can incorporate and take care of the maintenance necessary on this $42 billion moving forward.
Now, let me ask you this. The Universal Service Fund has to be renamed, but realistically, do you think that model is dying anyway?
No, I think the model is strong. I think the model is accurate. But what I think is missing is who's funding it. Because now, if you look at the amount of fiber that has to go in the ground or has to go in the air that has to be maintained, it's going to be owned by more and more companies. It's not going to be just the 5 big ones that are going to take the brunt of it and pay for the small offset of the small companies that are supplying the rural application of it. It has to be done by everybody. So I'm including cellular telephone carriers, I'm including cable TV companies, because they're going to be part of the BEAD process as well. They're already part of RDOF, so they're going to be part of that BEAD process as well. So I think across the board, we have to realize that it's not about telephone. It is not about cable TV. It is not about wireless telephone service. It's about broadband.
Right.
That's why I say it's becoming more broad, and it should be more inclusive, and everybody that pays into it should recoup the maintenance dollars coming out of it.
Yeah, I'm asking about the model only because the model was there to support incumbent local exchange carriers, basically
Smaller ones,
small ones, right? The mom and pops that were they had this territory that was cordoned off for them. I guess we'll see what happens over the next 10, 15 years, because that's the thing is that you had mentioned fiber started in the late 70s and kind of carried through. It has not been around that long. The market is not mature. Right. So we don't really know what the market's going to do. I would theorize, and this is just throwing stuff against the wall, but when you take a look at these tier 3 is what we would refer to them as, ILEC, incumbent local exchange carriers, it seems to me that there's ones that provide fiber and they do a phenomenal job. Like there was a report that came out recently that North Dakota is like the best fibered state, believe it or not. Yeah, so if you want fiber to the home service, go to North Dakota. Great people, great service. But what it comes down to is we don't know how competitive these markets will get, because at a certain point, there's going to be a capitalist drive, I believe, to provide competitive service. You can see what AT&T is doing in Mesa, Arizona right now, for instance, is they're doing deployments outside of their required ILEC footprint, if you will. And they're going into areas as a competitive local exchange carrier, a CLEC, to offer service in a very congested market. I mean, extremely congested. There's already like 3 or 4 carriers that are there. And they're there to compete because they want to win the service that's in that community. So it's not like AT&T is going to up and build fiber to North Dakota, for instance. However, there is going to be a lot more competition in these rural areas, I think, than we give it credit for, because after you have, enough fiber built out, I do believe that there's going to be an ability to connect to current fiber links and probably extend networks into areas that maybe it didn't make sense before.
And it's true, but keep in mind what BEAD is and what it's done, right? So everybody's talking about the $42 billion that's coming out, but the number was actually $62 billion. $20 billion of that was for subsidies immediately for those that couldn't afford it. So I see that being the driving factor for the USF or the UBF moving forward, is it's not tied to a company, it's tied to an individual.
Right.
Right?
It's
to
a
make
subsidy,
sure
yeah.
it's a subsidy
It's a
to
fund.
take care and to maintain that line.
It is expensive to own these networks.
Absolutely.
Right. And the maintenance on it, the everyday damage. If you want to put a garden, outside your house, you're going
to infrastructure, right? I mean, it's just so many.
It's so
much
big.
assets.
So big.
But in a local way, you can damage your own fiber infrastructure right around your house.
Yep.
And there's a cost to that. Someone's getting a couple guys getting it out there with equipment. Someone's got to splice it up. These are all real costs.
Every truck run. Oh my God.
And it's very easy. I can see the cable darn near on my lawn in my backyard because they buried it so shallow. This is a big problem.
I buried my own duct.
You
I
would.
did.
You
I
would
buried my own duct.
right?
Yeah.
I did it more than once.
Yes.
But every time I go to a house, I'll bury an interduct from my house to the pedestals. And then I just put an L or a bracket on it to take it to whichever service I'm getting. I want it to be in that and protected. So I'll spend my money to take care of my service.
Yeah.
Because I don't want it to be dug up.
And there's a lot of direct buried cable out there that's not
Absolutely, a
protected
ton.
that way,
Yeah.
and it's going to get damaged.
Yeah.
You're
right.
Micro-trenching or not.
So when the zombie apocalypse happens, we go to your house. 'cause you'll
Absolutely.
still have service.
I'm ready.
The panic room this guy's got is out of control.
Dan the Prepper.
Fago for days. That's right. If you like tuna
yeah.
and Fago,
Yeah.
Dan's panic room is the way to go.
So a lot of what we're talking about is just efficiency of deployment, and that's what we're looking at. How is that solved? Whether that's permitting or the people problem. Does robotics and automation play any part in that? We have been involved in various different robotics projects here at PLP that are providing more efficient means to installing products, safer ways to install that. Does that play something?
I don't think it's an install thing. I think it's a manufacturing thing. I think its ability to be consistently repeating the same process over and over is great. I don't think we can take the subject matter expert out of their hands. So in other words, the contractors are experts at what they do. Those guys are phenomenal. They'll show you the best way to do something and they'll deploy it. I don't think either AI or robotics is going to really change things. Now their equipment's changed, right? And it's updated and it's more real. That's cool. But there's still a human element involved. I mean, it's like we always say that PLP is a hell of a manufacturer. We're a terrible distributor, but we're a hell of a manufacturer. Let them be them. Let the contractors do that deployment strategy, and that's why we've got the deployment specialist team. We want to make sure that we don't denigrate any aspect of what any of us do in this industry, right? It's all very important. And while I think robotics and AI have a place in it, I don't think it's the overriding factor. I think the continued strategy and understanding of the subject matter experts in each of their field, PLP, manufacturing and sales and training, the distributors doing what they do, the end users doing what they do, and the contractors doing what they do. We all play a part, and I think it's all essential that we continue to communicate with each other, because isn't this a communications industry that we're in, I think?
Yeah,
right?
We don't do it very well.
And that's one of the biggest problems that we have as an industry is there's not enough transparency. People aren't being upfront with everybody on what process and what's necessary and what they need. And if they would just be more transparent, I think we'd all be better off.
There are ways I think that we can utilize AI though that we haven't seen it yet, so it's hard to say where it would come up and be a big advantage. But one of those, I think you would agree, is supply chain. The way that we order things today, there are systems in place that will determine whether you're almost out of something. And then you've got to order
automatically order.
Yeah.
Automatically order
min-max rates, right? Min-max rates been around forever.
This is my point, right?
And not utilized well.
Well, it couldn't be. So it was utilized greatly from the start to 2021. And then whenever late 21, 22 hit, supply chain imploded. Yes, because of global economic issues. Yes, related to COVID. And yes, probably other circumstantial issues that were byproducts of all that stuff. But one thing is for sure, the systems that are in place that predict what a need is are so antiquated from the standpoint of we're always looking back to determine what we need in the future. And when you have a $42.5 billion funding vehicle, you know it's going to be an increase.
We've never seen it before, though.
How could you look back to determine what you need tomorrow? This is part of the problem. So you would need you could potentially have an AI tool that would maybe theoretically model what the growth trajectory is and maybe expect in advance what needs are to put you in a position to put orders in to hold more inventory. But there's a lot of complications to that.
I'm not saying don't go in that direction.
Yeah.
But I got 2 words. Too late to compensate for BEAD.
BEAD.
This is something that should have been incorporated 5 years ago.
I would think that AI or something like that is being used by service providers to even plan networks.
They're using
deployments.
engineering firms. They're using contractors.
They're using
there
AI,
is
I'm not
GIS. So that's the other one, or another one would be GIS has been a big deal.
Right.
So our company uses GIS to map assets. This is the way fiber to the home projects, for the most part, are mapped today, is through these GIS services. Interestingly enough, the cities don't always work on GIS that these guys are working for. And so these systems don't communicate well. So in regards to what can we do with the advancements in technology and how can we use AI and how can we use advanced tools, there's entities that are producing CAD-based designs of things that have to talk to these cloud-based GIS services. And there's a conversion of data and man hours and manpower that goes into... No standardization. So these two have to struggle to talk to each other. There's good reasons why the CADers are on CAD.
Babylon. Nobody knew how to talk to each other. That's what we're facing right now with AI.
Yeah, so you have people that do have these wazoo tools. And so what's cool about some of this GIS stuff is that if you plot a central office where the fiber cable is going to come from, it can design a theoretical network for you. Pretty neat stuff.
Right.
Now, okay, that's a little bit of a gimmick from a programming standpoint. What it doesn't do is act in real time. So it's not, there are network operations centers, NOC centers, that understand what's going on in a network. I don't think that we're making decisions in real time that we could based on damages necessarily that are occurring, or maybe looking at best routes, or I don't think we're looking at it as an efficiency. We're monitoring and we are fixing issues as they occur, but I don't think we're using AI for what I think AI is for, which is envisioning a better way and a better place to do something, or how to
more efficient.
More efficient.
Every growth in the industry, though, came with its challenges, because it's no different than records, right? So when we were, God, years and years ago, when we were going from the STEP office into the DMS 1U offices, right, for the telephone companies, the records carried the weight of the world on its shoulders, because it was garbage in, garbage out. If you didn't have good records,
right,
and the same thing with AI or GIS or anything else, if you're populating with crap, guess what you get back?
Yeah, if your records that are behind the software program that do this stuff are bad, then it's
then you get garbage out.
Right.
Well, we're kind of coming full circle too, because we're talking about AI, we're talking about GIS, and what's driving all that, or what's enabling all of that is communications infrastructure.
Yeah, it's
right?
fiber. Yeah,
it's
fiber. It's a self-repeat, kind of a self-feeding monster.
So it's kind of like, what came first? Was it, what enabled that? Was it the fiber build out or the communications infrastructure, or is it driving that?
It was the
build-out?
fiber. I would say it's the physical properties of fiber that allowed us to envision a day when we could do things and dream bigger. And now
the unfortunate part, though, is they did fiber deployment the same way they did copper deployment, the same way they did all other deployments at the time. They didn't elevate their job. They didn't elevate the thought process until after the first deployment phase went through. And they're learning. They're still growing. They're still developing different ways, different strategies. Perfect case in point is the micro-trenching or the nano-trenching. They're doing things differently now because they understand it differently. It's not the same old service. Mm-hmm. It's not the same old broadband that our grandfather had or didn't have. I'm talking from a grandfather's perspective.
Yeah.
But it's different, right? So we're growing and we're learning and we're getting better at everything we do and deploy. We're getting so good at it, as a matter of fact, that it's going to take something extraordinary to get us to the next level.
Yeah. I think you're watching an evolution right now.
There you go.
That you just don't, you see it, you kind of understand where it's going to go.
You're living in it.
We're living it.
We're
Right.
We're living it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we grew up in the internet age, right?
Right.
We're probably the
AOL
last
and
ones.
dial-up and then-
We remembered pre-internet, post-internet,
Right.
but everyone after us pretty much didn't remember that.
Well, I can tell you, being in the industry for over 40 years, is that there's been more growth, there's been more advancements in the last year or in 2023 than there was in the first 40 plus years
Right. Okay.
altogether.
So, final word, because I know you got to jump on a plane. Where's it going?
Inside of it, though, I'm not going to get on the wing.
Jump out of plane.
I jump out of a plane.
He jumps out on the other end.
So where are we going? What's the next?
It's probably the most exciting time to be in this industry. I mean, anybody that doesn't want to be in this industry doesn't want excitement. I mean, because of the changes, the rapidness of it, the growth, the technology, everything we see, and I continue to learn every day in this industry, and that's the beauty of it. I mean, if you want a life that's exciting and you want the ability to see what's next and be part of what's next, because I can't tell you exactly where it's going, but I can tell you it's the greatest place to be. I mean, not just PLP, but the industry as a whole is a phenomenal industry. And I've been in it for a long time, and I can count on one hand the number of people that haven't been the best to work with. Literally. I mean, this industry is full of awesome people.
Brendan?
The question is, what's next?
Yeah. What's next for the communications industry?
I think when we start to live the fruits of the labor of the fiber deployment and get augmented reality in public spaces and, more virtual reality, because the speeds have now caught up with stuff and driverless cars are a thing. I think that the economy that then enables, it's really hard to determine. But one thing's for sure, I want my kids to be involved in communications, right? So what's next is I think that through all of this, we will have a better understanding, such as we did when the internet was born and everyone had to become a, computer engineer. That was like the hot job. At this point, that job's a dime a dozen. It's not, you want a good computer engineer. IT people are indispensable. We all know that. But I do think the next phase are these network technicians, because it's going to be absolutely everywhere. I'm so excited.
Good move, Dr. Phil. I like that one. That was
you got it.
That was philosophical.
You got it, Danny. Yeah, I'll look out for you, pal. Yeah, we did the research.
Well, it's a very cool industry. Lots of opportunities right now. So thanks for being here. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah. And if you want to connect with Dan or Brendan, they're very active on LinkedIn. So be sure to connect with them.
Dan's on the dark web. But yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn. And
I'm actually AI.
You cannot pretend to be next generation. I'm sorry.
No, I don't have intelligence
He's
unless
first
it's
generation.
artificial.
Thank you, Josh.
Yes.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
Thank
take
you.
care.
All right.